Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast for our second monument of the season, Ronde van Vlaanderen, around Benji's house. That's the English translation. 273 kilometres of non-stop Helingen short cobbled climbs after they get into Flanders from the start in Antwerp. It finishes in Oudenaarde, which is the heart of cycling in the Flemish region. The last climb is the Oude Kwaremont Paterberg combo, which they do they do that combo twice, but they do Kwaremont 3 times. It has climbs like the Canaryberg, Bergtenhout, Valkenburg, Molenberg, Berendries, so many, too many to name. They're all like 1K, 6%, or a variation of that theme. This show is presented by Zwift. As you know, if you haven't been checking the news, Egan Bernal is already back riding and on Zwift. He did a huge group ride on Zwift yesterday. The favourite for this race, Tour of Flanders, Mathieu van der Poel, began his recovery in January on Zwift. You can see the rides, if you follow him on Zwift, that he did there back in January. And he was one of the main protagonists today. If you want to check out Zwift, you can go to Zwift.com for a free 7-day trial through the link in the description down below. Zwift are also the title sponsor of Paris-Roubaix Femme avec Zwift, which is in a couple of weeks, our third monument of the year. But Benji, decent breakaway in Flanders went today with Taco Taco Burrito Burrito.
Yes, Taco was in the breakaway, or should we call him Ataco van der Horn at this point? Yeah, sorry,
Banned.
that was terrible. Next to that, Manuele Boado for Astana. Typical, every single review we've got attackers from that team. Astana also from the team of Matthijs Paaskens, which is that Bingwall team, as you call it. Bingo in my language at least. Griniar from Lotto, Lindsay de Wilder for Sport Vlaanderen, Max Kante for Movistar, Mozzato in there as well. Tom Bowley, who's riding with a fracture and is visibly in pain when you see him on the screen. So I wonder why he's doing that. And next to that, it was also reported that Stan de Wolf was in the breakaway. Is that correct? Because I thought there were only 8 riders.
He was there. As you Citroen did have him there. So decent break. Like, de Wolf's a serious guy. And Taco.
Yeah, certainly. And to be honest, behind them, we had the typical teams chasing that we expected to do so. But there was some doubt of who was going to control this race, knowing that Wout van Aert was out of this race, meaning that Jumbo has less responsibility to take. And therefore, Alpecin was a team that came forward with the likes of Julien Vermote, Tim de Klerk as well, very prominent at the front. Also, Eduardo Affini quite a bit for Jumbo as well. So those 3 were doing most of the work at the front of the peloton to keep the gap roughly at about 4 minutes. But honestly, not too much happened.
Were you surprised that, no, not at Jumbo, you know, they still have Laporte and Bernard, but Quick-Step, I thought they were going to, I don't know, de Klerk just came back from injury. They've had a pretty weak Classics year so far. I would have, is the issue that if you lean it all on Alpecin, you get a Varchek UAE Tour situation again. So they I guess, I don't know, sometimes I overthink it. I was surprised that Quick-Step were pacing, but that's why de Klerk is there, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. And perhaps they also don't want to put a pressure on de Klerk that he needs to be there in the middle of the race or in the final of the race at that point, saying that you can't pace at the start. Yeah, you're kind of, I think coming back from an injury, this is a good way to get his kilometers in and probably feels like a training ride for him. A pretty rough training ride, Tour of Flanders. But the race kept going. We had no fight between Fedorov and Vergaerde, unfortunately, this time around, unlike last year. So quite a sad moment. But after that, quite a few crashes. We had Kenneth van Rooij crashing like twice. And then also next to that, he also had a mechanical. So that's one of the unluckiest guys of the day, I dare to say. The first prominent climb was the Oude Kwaremont, the first one. And nothing happened there. So that was the Oude Kwaremont.
It was Bora controlling. They were riding for Pollard, I think.
Yeah, I think so as well. And after that, we knew that the most prominent climb that was upcoming was perhaps the Molenberg with about 100k, something like that. And it was actually before the Molenberg we also already saw action by the likes of Jonas Koch for Bora, but then a different team tried to do something on the Molenberg, right?
Jumbo-Visma, I'll take this opportunity to say we have been destroyed doing our previews so far this year. Sanremo, Ewan and Alaphilippe pulled out. We have to do them before the race, otherwise it's literally not a preview. Then it's a live commentary. And we uploaded it 2 days later. Van Aert, the top favourite, pulls out of Flanders. So that necessarily changed Jumbo-Visma what they had to do in this race because they now had Laporte and Benoit, who objectively were like fourth and maybe eighth favourites in the race, with MVP, Pogacar, Asgreen being the top three names. Nathan van Hooydonk went clear, bridged across to Koch. I was surprised that FDJ didn't have Genietz go with Nathan van Hooydonk. Instead, they elected to pace behind him with Kung's second wheel. I was like, why not get riders up the road? It's Nathan van Hooydonk, and then force Quickstep to chase. Eventually, Quickstep rode as if they were Quickstep 2021. They started chasing Van Hooydonk. It was then later that the move I expected on the Molenberg happened, which was a big group of like second-tier guys going, including previous winner Bettiol. It was initiated by Garcia Cortina, who's actually looked quite good, just bereft of teammates. Pedersen, Mats Pedersen in the group. It's kind of like his Wevelgem 2021 early move with a teammate Kirsch, with Mick van Dijk, who won Tour of Flanders like U23 last year, and they caught up to Van Hooydonk. Who was Quickstep, Benji? Steimler and Stieber. I think that was an illusion of strength up front.
Okay. I think next to that Quickstep duo, we also had Johnny Vermeers, which was a big factor because that meant that Van der Poel was kind of in a seat as well, next to Jumbo, who was feeling like they were in some kind of seat, but probably a bit stressed because Pedersen was also in that group. And I think every team was stressed that Pedersen was in that group. And it meant that one team behind was not really presented in that chasing group, and that's the team of UAE. And UAE basically went to the front in the peloton. Gap was roughly 22nd at the start. We had the likes of Trenton and Vegard Stekelengham doing most of the work, I think, in the chasing. And it would probably mean that if they spent their energy there, that Poggi might be isolated fairly soon. So that's a good thing for all the other teams that are presented in that front group. But on the other hand, the gap went up, right? Like 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 40 seconds. At some point, did you get stressed that this group with Pedersen might actually do something?
I think Quickstep realised, holy shit, we've just given a minute to Pedersen against Stieber and Steimler with Asgreen behind. If they get dropped, we're going to end up with a situation where Asgreen's having to close 90 seconds. Same for Van der Poel with Alpecin. Eventually, though, they stopped working, the Quickstep guys. The gap went down to 15 seconds. We got to second Quarmont. We knew something was going to happen, and it did. Pogacar from the Wout van Aert Kemmelberg position on Wevelgem, terrible position, came from deep, and it looked like, someone said in the Lanterne Rouge YouTube members Discord, it looked like Danny Martinez and Agita attacking in the Grand Fondo against the amateurs in January or December. Like, he went past everyone. He's just like, get out of my way. Only Asgreen held his wheel and almost might have ruined his own race there, perhaps. But eventually he was just in such bad position. I wonder if he'd been in good position, if he could have got big separation. So the group of favourites have caught that Pedersen break. I never saw Mats Pedersen again.
By the way, an important factor there, Jumbo. Laporte had a crash just before that out of Quarmont came and ended up in a ditch. And we didn't even see that Laporte was down at first because he was literally in the ditch together with Anthony Turgis, right? And that actually probably caused quite a bit as well for him to come back. And he was back just before that out of Quarmont, but obviously at the back of the peloton. So if something happens there like that Poggi attack, that's not going to go too well. And when it comes to Benoit, I think that his positioning was not that great on that out of Quarmont, but later in the race that might even be more of a problem. But I think, Poggi went pretty hard there. Asgreen was in the wheel, and Van der Poel was one of the riders that was sitting back. He didn't care that those two were going off for a bit, right?
Yeah, he was happy to be brought in the wheels. This is still with so long to go, the second Quarmont. We're talking like 55 kilometres plus, but it definitely split up the race, and we saw on the climbs, Tadej Pogacar was going to be the strongest on any of these cobble climbs today. We saw Pidcock in bad position pretty consistently, actually. I don't know what his legs were like, but Bahrain looked good. They were caught, and there's like G2, G3, G4. It's all across the road. Laporte does make it to that group with Asgreen, MVP, Pogacar. There's Tratnik there as well as Fred Wright. Ineos have Dylan van Baarle. Behind is Benoit. His race was pretty much done already at that point. Tratnik attacked on, I can't recall. He looked really strong on a subsequent climb. There's no respite at this point after, I think, before the Tyenberg. And then eventually, Dylan Van Baal. Ineos got into a group, Benji, with Pidcock, Van Baal, and was it Clock, I think, in a group ahead. And they were all
Yeah.
working really well. Clock is Ben Turner, by the way, Big Ben. That nickname is going to stick. Ineos go up the road with Dylan Van Baal and Fred Wright. Well, Fred Wright's on Bahrain, by the way. I think it was a really good move because it puts them in a seat behind. Now Pidcock has to, quote unquote, just mark Pogacar and MVP, and Bahrain need to play the numbers game too. It's what Jumbo-Visma ideally would have been hoping to do, but Benoit wasn't able to do it. And it was Quick Step, Benji. This is what I couldn't believe. Quick Step were the ones working after Asgreen had been dropped before. And this was, I'm not sure if this was before or after Asgreen Mechanical.
No, this was before the mechanical of Asgreen, and it really came down to the next climb where the full separation was going to happen in that elite group, where Quickstep was already pacing again, and that was on the Koppenberg, right? That we saw that move towards the that elite group moved towards the Koppenberg, and then we saw a move by Pogacar almost straight from the bottom, and he started hammering that climb, and Van der Poel didn't instantly react. He was like on the left side of the road, I think, in the wheel of Laporte, who was back after that crash, obviously. And then Van der Poel went to the right, straight through the middle, and was on the wheel of Pogacar, and they went over the top with... Was there anyone in their wheel still? Because I think Madua, right, was the only one?
Madua, he looked incredible. Kung was also looking pretty good, but just a bit off. Madua was the only non-MVDP, non-POG character that could semi-match them on climbs today. And he would eventually get to those two, and they would bridge across to Fred Wright and Dylan Van Baal. Asgreen had a mechanical, but I think he didn't have it today either. Yeah. I don't think he had it. He was already getting dropped out of position. Laporte looked not the same as E3 either, but with how much that crash cost him, presumably a fair bit. And we get this five. Van Baal, Madouas, MVDP, Pogacar, Fred Wright. Top three in Flanders, outstanding result for Madouas certainly, with Kung not able to sprint really well behind, for Fred Wright as well. Dylan Van Baal's got Pidcock behind. Were you surprised those three, Benji, with last Kwaremont Paterberg to come, was so willing to work with Pog and MVDP? Because I was literally in the chat just being like, Dylan, man. And we'll get to the finish where this going to sound stupid. But I was like, you have to sit on, man. Like, they're going to send Kwaremont Paterberg. You know they're going to send it. But I guess does sitting on even help? Like, they'll just ride. I don't know. I thought he should have sat on with Pidcock behind.
I think it depends on what you believe can still happen, because Pidcock was dropped already on that Koppenberg. So Van Baal in his mind is probably thinking, well, if I sit up, I've got a guy behind, but he's not really that great today. So if he gets back, well, then I'm still going to have to respond to everything that happens on the Oude Kwaremont and Paterberg. But to be honest, I would have also probably tempered their riding a bit to make sure they don't ride as much or nearly not at all with the two riders that were the strongest in that group on paper, which was Poggi and Van der Poel. And even Madouas, despite following there, I would have clearly said, no, I'm not going to ride with them, because that's what you do if you're an outsider. You make sure that the strongest riders in the race spend more energy so you can stay in their wheel and benefit from the fact that they spent more energy than you when you actually get to the moment that matters, which is the upcoming Oude Kwaremont and Paterberg duo. And we were looking at a big action on the Oude Kwaremont first, and that group of five went to that Oude Kwaremont, while in the group behind, attack started flying left and right with Benoit going solo at some point. And, with Kung and someone else, was it?
Dylan Turns. Well, I think Benoit initiated it. I can't remember, though. Benoit didn't pull for Laporte, which I was surprised by. So Benoit seemed to go for himself. And then Kung and Turns were like, let's get more numbers up front. They never actually make it up front. But they started bringing across, Turns not working, Kung working with Benoit. Oude Kwaremont, Pog accelerates, Van Baal dropped immediately. And I was like, what were you playing at? But it seemed like he was actually riding for third in a way that was really conservative. He was riding against Madouas and Fred Wright and sort of riding his own pace, knowing you'd go way over your limit following Pog and MVDP. Kwaremont, Pogacar already goes solo with... No, it's not solo. He's with somebody. With MVDP without really attacking. Last Paterberg, hand on heart, Benji. did you think Pog was going to drop MVP? And how should he have approached last part of Berg? Short and steep to do it. A long full effort or one burst?
I thought it was possible to make it happen, and I think he should have done a long, steady effort because we know that Van der Poel has that acceleration and can follow that one burst. And if the tempo slows down again, he should be able to hold on. And I think he went for that steady pacing, Pogacar. But not going to lie, there were points there where I was like, okay, Van der Poel's dropping. Van der Poel's dropping. Look, he's on the right on that small 2 centimeter section on the right of the cobble, like that small asphalt section that Van der Poel follows onto the path every bloody year. And at a certain point, it looks like he was not having the balance that he needed, and there was a bit of a gap, and he closed it again. So unfortunately,
It's like he was in the wrong
uh,
gear.
yeah, it would have been interesting if, for example, Pogacar had a bit of a gap over the top of the Paterberg and Van der Poel had to chase it in those final 15 kilometers, but that was not happening. They went over the top together, and Pogacar tried, and at that point, what's your take? Who's going to win the sprint? What was it before we actually got to the sprint?
I mean, I'm going to sound like patting myself on the back, but yeah, I thought MVDP had 75 to 80% chance. Like Pogacar, great sprint for his size, of course. I don't think he has Alaphilippe's 2018 flat sprint, 5 to 10 second. Yes, he pushed Wout van Aert close in Makuni in the Olympics after an extremely hard mountainous race. But MVDP Asgren types, they are built diff. They are 75 kilos plus. Mathieu van der Poel always, after hard races, you saw in Dwars Tour, he can do 1400 watt peak on the flat. If it's an uphill drag like Giro Stage 1, yeah, it's different, but this isn't. And it's a flat sprint. We know that there's going to be finessing in the finish. We know that MVDP's 10-second burst. Last year, go and look at the data. Carlos Oswald wrote the article on Wednesday after Dwars Tour. We looked at his data and RVV, his sprint against Asgren. His 10 second is good. It's his 10 to 15 second that's bad, but he can gap someone like Pogacar off the wheel. That's a long way of saying I thought MVP would win the sprint, Benji. They work together. They get to the Flamme Rouge. Pogacar starts finessing, and the group is closing. The group is closing quickly with Dylan Van Baarle and Valentin Madouas working. We're going to analyze this sprint in full in a second. They come back. MVDP is basically track standing. We're like, oh my God, is this going to be like when Moritz went past him in Liège? Is Valentin Madouas going to beat MVDP and Pogacar in Ronde van Vlaanderen? He actually comes up the inside. MVDP baits Pog and then opens up his sprint from a standstill close and puts a full bike length into everybody, whilst Madouas and Van Baarle box in Pogacar, with Mathieu van der Poel taking his second Tour of Flanders win in the space of 3 years. We had another. He's been involved in all three sprints head-to-head, 3 years in a row. Van Baarle taking second, so weird tactics from him, but it worked out in the end, I guess. Madouas third, incredible result. I think I called him for top 10 as a hot take. Podium would have been a better take. Pogacar fourth, Kung fifth, Turn sixth, Fred Wright seventh, Pedersen eighth. We didn't really see Laporte ninth, Christoph 10th. Christoph actually had a really nice race today, I would like to say. But Benji, talk us through this sprint. I want to really talk about this sprint. They always get analysed. If you should have started quicker, you should have let it out, you should have done this and that. How should Pogacar have played this sprint? And does he have a right to be frustrated with, say, Van Baarle coming in onto MVDP's draft at the end? Because he was visibly mad after this race.
Yeah. Pogacar was visibly mad. That's something that's definitely true. But when it comes to Pogacar's sprint, I'd say that once you start your sprint in second position, you're dependent on the first rider for the speed that is being taken into the sprint. We saw, if we look at last year's sprint, Van der Poel was the one at the front, but had a decent tempo with Asgreen in the wheel, which then benefited Asgreen, who could start from far and therefore go from, I think, 230 meters from the finish line and go towards the finish line and end up beating Van der Poel from a rather fast compared to today's sprint and a far one as well. And then we look at today and we see that Van der Poel is starting it from a basically half the speed than last year, I dare to say, going into the final 250 meters. And obviously, Van der Poel sees that Van Baarle and Madouas are coming, and perhaps he thought to himself, if I wait long enough, then they might actually box in Pogacar here. And eventually it led to the point where Van der Poel kick-started a sprint before actually properly launching, because he stopped for a bit and then started again. And that was right at the moment where Van Baarle and Madouas came by the sides of Pogacar. And the only way that I see that Pogacar, if we analyze only the last 250 meters, could get out of this is by launching just before Van Baarle and Madouas block him in. But then he's risking to launch quite early, which is, yeah, the thing I see as the option here, because there's quite a few people that are saying, well, he should have launched a sprint. He should have had a faster speed in the run into the sprint. But you can only do that if you're a first rider. And if you're the first rider with Van der Poel in your wheel, you're probably going to lose a sprint anyway.
If he leads out MVDP and MVDP beats him in the sprint, he looks like the dumbest rider in history. So he was hoping MVDP stuffed it. MVDP played this perfectly. The only way he loses this sprint, and he can always do after hard races, it seems, it's sort of what do. He can always do 1400 with 10-second good power. If MVDP starts at 250 with Pogacar in the draft the entire time, kind of like the McCooney sprint, Pogacar can win. But if he does like a long sprint, and that's how Asgreen went early and made it into a 17, 20-second sprint. If he makes it into a 10, 12-second sprint, and I think he was trying to bait him, Benji, that initial surge, and then he stopped, looked, he's like, holy shit, I actually got half a bike length on you just doing that. Sat back down again, waited for Madouas, because he knew, right, those guys coming behind are fucked. So like they're not going to actually beat MVDP in the sprint. And I don't know if it was by design. Alaphilippe did MVDP dirty in Brabantse Pijl 2019, boxed him in incredibly. Van Baarle did that to Pogacar. It seemed like Pogacar didn't really trust his sprint, Benji. I think the way he's done sprints, like he beat Alaphilippe in Liège, draft, last 50 meters come out of the wheel. I think he was hoping that would happen. Van Baarle, though, let's talk about the argy-bargy. Van Baarle, who's carrying more speed from behind. Those guys have paced full gas to catch back to Pog and MVDP. Van Baarle comes in onto MVDP's wheel, and he's carrying a lot more speed than Pog, and almost chops Pog's front wheel, and Pog takes his hands off the bars and pushes Van Baarle. I don't really know how to call this one, because it's actually rare that you see this. You don't really see this in bunch sprints too much. Obviously, Pog, I don't know, he nearly got his front wheel chopped, but he was already cooked by this point. He was like, how could he wanted to open up his sprint into a space that literally didn't exist. Madouas on the barriers. But yeah, I think that's a long way of saying I think MVDP played it perfectly. Yes, it would have been hard for him to lose this sprint. What do you think for Pog in the future, Benji? Do you think he's going to in future be like, I have to go on Paterberg against the big classics guys? Like, I can't just go to the sprint.
I don't think he should be like overly sad by this loss. He showed that he can win all 5 monuments in his career. But about today, I do want to add that, yes, Van Baarle did slowly get into Pogacar's front wheel there, but I don't think it was I wouldn't rate it as a deviation, like a proper deviation that should infer the deviation rule, to be honest. He did not necessarily endanger Pogacar, in my personal opinion. But then Pogacar also took his hand off his handlebars, so he could honestly get relegated as well for that. So we're looking at 2 potential situations there. It's not like Van Baarle was the only one doing something bad, or bad. I wouldn't call it bad necessarily, but I don't think this was a full-on deviation in that point. So I think the person that Pogacar is mostly angry at is himself. And I feel like Pogacar choked it, but I can't blame him too much, because I probably would have done the same in that similar situation, because it doesn't happen often that you've got this specific situation in a race, so it's very difficult to prepare for it. So I can't really say, oh, Poggy, you fucked it, mate. Come on. Like, nah, I can't say that, because yeah, he lost the race, but a lot of riders would have done that in his situation.
Well, yeah, like he was banking on MVDP sort of bottling it and going at 250 to go and getting the slipstream and then maybe coming around and winning. And MVDP played it so cool. It's like ice in his veins type stuff. Like sometimes his positioning, sometimes his choices leave a little bit to be desired. But in the finale here, unbelievable. He started racing at MSR about 3 weeks ago, two and a
Yep.
half weeks ago. He's won Dwars Tour, a stage of Settimana, Coppi Bartoli, which no one saw, and now his second Tour of Flanders. Incredible result. And yeah, big congrats to MVDP withstanding the onslaught from Pog. I would say, Benji, Pog on Jumbo Visma wins this race easily.
Yeah, I
Pogacar on
think
the
so as well.
climbs. Think about like the panic situation they were doing with 75Ks to go, with Trenton having to chase for Pogacar. And I think that's why he really wanted second at worst. I think, yeah, I hope to see him back at Flanders next year. What do you think? How do you think Van Aert being here changes the race? Because it was a weird race.
Honestly, it would probably have changed quite a bit, for the sense that Jumbo got basically somewhat beheaded by the fact that Laporte crashed, and then Benoit was in a terrible position when it mattered on the, was it second Quadamont that he was in a terrible position? Or at least on one of the most important climbs of the day, he
On
was not
all
in
of
the
them,
position
mate.
he needed to be. And therefore, he was not able to respond when it mattered. And yeah, I think if Wout is there, at least one of those three would be in a good position. And with Laporte crashing, then they'd still have two riders left, you know? So I think there's quite a big difference there. We have been able to win this race. Perhaps we'll never know, but he wasn't here, so we'll have to do it with the facts that we have, which is that Van Poel was the strongest rider of the day. And yeah, we can talk about what if Van Aert was here, what if Van Aert was here, but we can talk about Milano Sanremo. What if Ewan was there? Like, we can do that about every race, you know? So, meh. I think that in the end, the strongest riders of the day were ahead for the last 15 kilometers, and one of them won.
What about Quickstep? Best rider placed 23rd. It's all or nothing at Paris-Roubaix, Benji.
Yeah.
This has been a horrendous classic season for them. It's not all their fault. Same with Israel, who weren't participating today, which was a little bit curious because I think a couple of their cobble guys were ready to start. You're permitted to not attend a World Tour race if you can't because of injury or sickness, rather, during COVID. Quickstep, it's I think they're struggling with their identity, Benji. They seem to
Mm-hmm.
struggle with that today, where they're closing a move full gas pacing with Lampard. I'm like, guys, you've got at best the fourth strongest rider in the race here, and you're bringing Poggi
Yeah.
and MVP back.
After he dropped as well, so it's
I
not
know.
like he was the fourth anymore in my eyes either. So
Nah.
I didn't see it from that point onwards. And yeah, they had bad luck. Like, Asgreen having his mechanical at the top of the Koppenberg is about one of the worst places in the entire race to have a mechanical.
Yeah.
But you saw there was this moment where they had a shot on that Koppenberg when Asgreen was standing still, and she were past him and looked like, you gotta be kidding me.
Yeah, I
You
know.
gotta
It's
be
so good.
kidding me.
Well, it's
Like
not very
3
good
times in
Quickstep
a
fan.
row. And seeing that phase was exactly what I thought to myself in that situation. Like, they had bad luck the entire preseason. They also simply, they're not what they used to be necessarily in team strength, even if they were in full healthy condition, in my personal opinion. Asgreen would probably have been pretty good as well, nonetheless. If he didn't have that puncture mechanical, I dare to say he might have certainly top 10. But hey, that's not how the race turned out. And yeah, perhaps they can try again on Paris-Roubaix in 2 weeks. They've got 2 weeks now to recover instead of one, due to the change of schedule with Amstel Gold Race between those two races.
Anyway, it was a memorable Ronde van Vlaanderen, seeing the back-to-back Tour de France winner going to a final sprint against one of the best classics riders in the world. I think it's good for the entertainment value, certainly, that MVP looks back. We will do some back analysis later. Otherwise, shame, of course, that the top favourite Van Aert wasn't there, but still a very, very exciting race. And I think
Yeah.
it's nice, Benji, to see Pogacar a little bit frustrated for once. It can't be too easy all the time.
Yeah.
It's good to see some adversity. So yeah, it was. I'm not. Yeah, it's a shame for him, I guess, missing out on the podium. But we'll see how he fights back. Maybe he's a scarier prospect in his next races. But yeah, any last thoughts on the Tour of Flanders, Benji? Would you rate this above the Asgreen? It's very similar to the Asgreen one last year.
Yeah, it's similar. I think it's going to sound weird, but the fact that the weather was a bit meh today kind of made the images look a bit worse. And I don't know if that is a factor for many people, but for me, that made it a bit less fun than last year.
Yeah, it was like snowing in Flanders. It
Yeah.
was cold conditions. It's snowing, like 2 meters of snow in Andorra. Anyway, great race. And Pogacar like Alaphilippe, like Balla, if he cared to do it. These small guys are scary prospects at Flanders. I think Evenepoel should be drafted in with Alaphilippe next year for Flanders. That's they have to, I think.
Yeah.
Otherwise, yeah, Lotto Soudal, Campanarts. I don't know what happened with him. Not great for him either. But that was our men's Tour of Flanders recap. If you enjoy LRCP, make sure to subscribe on YouTube and like the video down below. Comment, were you surprised by Pogacar's, or how well or not as well he did in both the sprint and on the climbs? We have the women's Tour of Flanders recap as a separate YouTube video to be uploaded tomorrow. It's all the same file on podcast players, uploaded same day if you want to check it out there. But thanks as always for your support. Benji and I got some race attendance news to be dropped shortly. Ciao.